There are three steps to building with AI agents. The first step is getting good with agent oriented programming. This is calling the LLM, getting structured outputs, dealing with the different providers, and stringing together basic workflows. The second step is creating agent services. That means bringing a little bit more professionalism to how you're packaging the agents for downstream consumers or producing events from those agents themselves. The final step is putting agents out as a product. In this step, we're less concerned with all the technical details and the implementation details and more about the broader product lifecycle of using agents. Can you go from idea to something that's published? Here's the breakdown of step number one. Take about 3 weeks to get over all these topics. So the first one is the basic concepts. You're going to want to know how to interact with LLMs through the agents, making sure you're getting back structured outputs, and also the basics of object-oriented programming and functional programming. Now, some may say that's overkill, but I think a lot of these libraries, this is what they're doing. This is what they're using underneath the hood anyways. So it's good to understand how those two paradigms work to make sure that you're not too lost when you're reading the source code, inevitably when you need help. Week number 2 is all about extending the agents. So there's a bunch of ways you can extend agents. I think the most important ones are web browsing and then being able to add in your own custom tools. Now, web browsing is important because anytime you are using LLMs, they're not trained up to today's current date. So web browsing gives them the ability to access information that's up to date. Custom tools, the reason you want to go into custom tooling is because more often than not, you're going to want your agents to call APIs that you've written, or maybe a function that you've written, or maybe an external API from a different company or a different service. So you're going to want to give agents that ability to call these things because they don't come out of the box with that ability. Week number 3 is then going into retrieval augmented generation. This is pretty important. This is probably the most popular use case for large language models, AI, agents, is taking some type of document and then doing something with it. So PDFs are number one. I'll say images are second. Then we get into video and audio, which in themselves are getting easier to work with. But I wouldn't beat yourself up if you're struggling with video and audio. You can probably leave that to later. All right, so let's get back into the document here, and I put together a quick checklist of all those items. Essentially, what you want to do is each week, just have a simple objective that you want to get through. They don't have to be these exact objectives. You can make your own. It's good to have a very simple objective that you can accomplish. This is assuming you are someone who has a 9 to 5, or maybe you have kids, family life. You have other responsibilities, and you can't spend 8 hours a day learning how to do agents on top of your other full-time job or your other full-time work. Now, if you're a freelancer, consultant, agency owner, the same kind of stands true because you have clients to serve and you have client work to do as well. So you want to make this simple and easy for you to actually accomplish and not be something where I have to spend 10 hours a day coding and trying to figure out this stuff on top of the work I have to do. All right, if we go into step 2, this is weeks 5 through 7. You'll notice I skipped week 4. That's your cool down week. You want to take a week in between this stuff to just cool down and maybe not even think about AI because it can get really easy to get burnt out on this stuff. There's just so much news, so much happening. There's a new model every week. But in week 5, where we focus our attention is agents as software. This is where you're going to be dealing with APIs and single page applications. Instead of using APIs, you're going to want to design your own API. Instead of using these low-code, no-code tools, maybe build your own no-code, low-code tool. So APIs and single page applications are going to help you do that. Those are the 2 areas I would dive deep in. This idea of building a GPT wrapper and having no moat is silly because all applications today that are around are wrappers around a database. So LLMs, agents are going to be the new database essentially, where people are going to build wrappers around them for the next 10, 15 decades to come. All right, week number 6 is the AMU pattern. Now, you probably haven't heard of this because I literally made it up, but it's based on a lot of concepts that I've been reading about and learning about from clean architecture and domain-driven design. The first is this idea of adapters, and adapters help with interacting with external systems, essentially. It gives you a very structured way to do that. The next is metadata. I picked that up from my data engineering background, and metadata driven pipelines is very much a thing. And metadata here can encapsulate a lot of different pieces, schemas, domain objects, value objects, whatever you want to throw in the metadata bucket. And in use cases, maps directly to your features and functionality that will be important to users or you to your internal system. Take some time to just go through each of these different components and understand how they work in their original setting, and then see how you can map them over to using in like your agents as a service. But I wouldn't try to adhere too strictly to any of these things because it's all context dependent. If you're trying to use clean architecture, domain driven design, and you're just building a to-do app, it's a little silly because it's not complex enough. Just be sure your context makes sense. Next up is week 7, which is going to be communication patterns. So in communication patterns, as you start to build services out or services that interact with other services, this is pretty normal. You're going to want to use things like topics and queues, event buses. Having a good grasp on that before moving on from this portion makes a lot of sense, because if you don't have a good grasp on that, you're just going to struggle. And events also work a little bit differently than request response. It's a different way of thinking. Once you do it a couple times, you get it. But the first couple times you interact this type of message publishing, pub sub stuff, it can be very difficult to grasp it and make it work in your favor. All right, so coming out of that, the checklist here is pretty much the same. We're going to have the API, single page applications, and a couple of objectives as well. So I would say just focus in on, again, making your own objectives around these things. For the API, for example, it might have been too easy for me when I was going through this to just build an API wrapper. So I added in making sure to protect it with a JWT token just to give it some flavor. And then also for single page application, making sure that it could have access to the API underneath as well that I just built. So for the week 6 checklist, you can pick up the books on this stuff. I highly recommend reading the books if you have time during that week to read the books. If not, find like some good articles around this as well. I may publish some videos too. And then week 7 is pretty light. Again, topics, queues, events. These things are very easy to pick up, hard to master. I would focus more on being practical with this. If you've built a little project, making sure that you can stand up a topic, stand up a queue, and publish events to it, read messages from it. Just do some simple message passing, and that should be enough. Step number 3 here, agent as a product, is probably the most fun. Honestly, if you're an engineer, you've been working with AI for a long time, maybe you have your own AI automation agency right now, you can skip steps 1 and 2 because you've gone through those steps on your own. Week 9, 10, 11, 12 is mostly around getting hands-on, getting practical. So we're jumping out of the weeds, we're jumping out of the technical details, and we're more talking about what's your life cycle for building out a project here. And week 9 is mostly ideation. I think you should spend 1 week because if you're like me, you have a lot of ideas all the time, so you have to cap it and making sure that you don't spend too much time just ideating. There's 3 types of problems. There's your problems, there's consumer problems, there's business problems. The best problems to solve are the ones that are your problems. If they overlap with consumer and business problems, that's even better. The most profitable is probably business problems. The most fun is probably consumer problems. So do with that what you will. A week 10 and 11 is like a little mini sprint. I just have build here as the step. But you want to go through designing your application, designing whatever product you're doing, coding it up, and then also hosting it. If you can't do this all in 2 weeks, this might be a hint that the thing that you're trying to build is just too complicated, right? So if you're going into the build and you're saying, I want to create a general purpose agent that can do anything, that's going to take a lot longer than 2 weeks. But if you go into it saying, I want to build an agent that can generate some content for social media, that's much more achievable, and that's something that you can possibly build in 2 weeks. And if you want to make it harder on yourself, you can add in some things like, I want to have this type of UI, I want to have this type of response time on the APIs. You can tweak it as you please. And then going into week 12 is actually publishing the piece of content, maybe publishing the project to your portfolio or publishing something to the marketplace as well. Okay. And so this is the checklist for weeks 9 through 12, pretty much what I just covered. Do something that's your problem, consumer problem, business problem. week 10 through 11, that design, code, host. Design means a lot of different things to a lot of people. Draw some boxes on the back of a napkin with some arrows. I don't care. I think design is important because if you don't just do a little bit of design up front, you end up doing a lot of unnecessary work while you're coding. And sometimes the hard part is not coding it. Sometimes the hard part is the design. And then the easy part becomes the code. But I find that when I skip that design step, the code becomes very messy. I get lost and I have to go back to doing design anyways, just to get my thoughts straight. And then hosting. A lot of people build things for local host and then they never put it online. They never publish it anywhere. I suggest that within this 2 weeks, you aim to publish this thing and put it on the web somewhere. Now, it doesn't have to live on the web. It doesn't have to be up online all the time because not everyone wants to pay for an app they just built. But just making sure you can actually deploy it to a live site if needed. So that's pretty important. Week 12 is that last step I think a lot of people also skip out when they're building things, is not having some tangible like artifact or outcome from all of the work you just did. Do a piece of content. I think that's one of the easiest ones, like a blog post, a video somewhere, or even like a Twitter demo. Those are pretty cool. You might go viral. Or put it into your portfolio. Make sure that you documented the project and that it's easily viewable to employers or potential clients. The hardest one to probably do off of this roadmap, if you've built something in 2 weeks, is to put it into a marketplace. There's things like AppSumo, Product Hunt, the App Store, the Android Store. So you could aim for that, and I'm saying that's completely valid, but just know that there's options here. You don't have to put out an app that has 1 million users over the weekend or anything like that. So this is a quick little roadmap. If you are looking to go from beginner all the way to someone who can use agents